Salutations to the Truth Core, whoever or wherever you may be on the planet. I'm here with a few words about compassion. I'd like to clarify and amplify some comments I made about it recently. And while I'm recording, I'm going to respond to two issues that came up in the Q&A on Ginny Thwaite's channel. So I'll respond to those matters first. One of them concerned the teachings of Rudolph Steiner regarding Ahriman. And the question was, is Ahriman the same figure as Yaldabaoth, of which I've often spoken, that is to say, the overlord of the archons? Well, you could make that comparison, you could make that correlation, but I don't think it would be especially valuable. It doesn't really add much, in my opinion, to the case against the archons and their human proxies. That is to say, the Xenosh, who are the racial or ethnic strain for the Archontic intrusion, and also those who are not of that particular strain, but who are accomplices to the same program. I spent about 20 years in deep involvement with anthroposophy. I know the work of Rudolph Steiner pretty well. When I moved to Europe, I moved my library and files at the time, but I chose to leave my collection of Steiner books behind. And I think I had something like 150 of them. I was intimately involved, although I was never a member, with the anthroposophical movement in the United States, and I was hosted by leading members of that movement to speak, to give talks, even though I was never a member. So I was a renegade and outsider who infiltrated anthroposophy, you could say. Bear in mind that anthroposophy and the totality of Rudolf Steiner's teachings are strongly Christocentric. So given that I reject the figure of Christ the Messiah, the divine incarnation of love, the human-divine hybrid, wherever you want to go with that, it's clear that I made a strong break with the Steiner movement at a certain time. I have occasionally used the word Ahrimanic, which could roughly be correlated to Archontic. But as I said, it's a correlation that doesn't bear out in application. It doesn't really provide insight other than you could have without the reference to Ahriman. So no, I don't dwell on that correlation, and I strongly warn people to be careful of involvement in the cult of Rudolf Steiner. Although I must say, Steiner was quite prescient in some things that he said, some of his observations that he made over the many years. He gave over 7,000 lectures, most of which I've studied, and he wrote something like 15 books, most of which I've read. What I find valuable in Steiner today would be certain observations that he made. For instance, he famously made the observation early on, he died in 1925, that electricity and the introduction of the appliances and tools of electricity would have tremendous damage upon society and human individuals. And he articulated that point really clearly. So he saw ahead way before the era of the internet. And today, of course, the internet, which runs on electricity, and all of the prosthetic devices, such as handheld iPods, iPads, I never know what to call them, all of that is way beyond mere electricity, but it all runs on electricity. So Steiner's observation, that's one of a few, stands up today. The other issue that came up in the Q&A concerns my use of wording when I said, in the beauty to come, that is to say, in the society and communities that can be constructed once this crime against humanity has been defeated, there is no punishment, but there is no forgiveness either. And I left it at that, and I left it intentionally blank. I do that so that you can reflect in your own mind on the inferences of that statement. No punishment, but no forgiveness. Well, how does that work out exactly? I consider that punishment is part of a program that operates on two factors, on two imperatives. Punishment is one, and the other is obedience. So if you go back and you look at the Abrahamic paradigm in the Old Testament, what do you find? You find a mandate coming from the Creator God, dictating a set of rules, the Ten Commandments, for instance. And proper respect for God and love for God, as they would have you believe, is something you show by obedience to the rules. And if you don't obey the rules, you're punished. Well, look at what's happening today with all the restrictions and rules and regulations about quantum 19. There are rules, you obey the rules. Don't obey the rules, you are punished. So I see in the program today, in the enforcement of this crime based on a lie, I see just another variation of the Abrahamic Father God wreaking havoc with the human races. Punishment is, it's an interesting idea. First of all, when you think about punishment, someone murders someone, not for self-defense, but in an act of cruelty or greed or deceit. And it's quite natural in the way people think today socially to say two things, right? You know exactly what they are. Well, we need to have justice for that crime, and the criminal needs to be punished. Well, suppose that you yourself hold those rules, hold those principles, demands, and that you yourself are responsible for implementing them. Well, how would you do that? Well, in order to get justice, you would have to make the effort that it takes to solve the crime of the murder, identify the murderer, and then what? Once you have apprehended the murderer, that's not quite justice. It's justice in the sense maybe that you have identified the murderer, but what do you do next? Well, the next thing is you punish the murderer. So there are two dynamics that operate in the code of social morality, I'll call it, which are deeply rooted in the Judeo-Christian ethic, not in the pagan ethic. The pagan ethic has an entirely different way of dealing with crime, deceit, and harm and suffering inflicted in the social order. So these two components of dual components really fundamentally drive social behavior and social attitude regarding harmful, deceitful, murderous people, thieves and liars, and people who cause suffering to others. One is the obedience punishment drive, and the other is the justice punishment drive. Can you see that? Do these drives and do the behaviors or laws or responses to harmful activity based on those two drives, do they really solve the problems? Do they really minimize or eliminate evil in the social order? I don't think so. There might be another way to regard those problems of evil and harm, and another way to treat the wrongdoers. That's what I'm suggesting when I say no punishment, but no forgiveness either. I guess you can infer from what I'm saying so far that I'm veering in the direction of extremely controversial topics. I'm close to talking about what are called transgressive issues. If I say certain things, just make observations and comments on crime and punishment and how to treat criminals, I'm moving very close to being transgressive, to saying things that are completely unacceptable. I'm really aware of that. Nevertheless, I would like to make my views clear for what they're worth. When I say no punishment and no forgiveness, I'm really talking completely about my own personal and subjective viewpoint. I don't want to convince anyone else, and I don't want anyone else to adapt my viewpoint. When I think of punishment, someone should be punished for doing something, I always ask myself, well, would I punish them? Would I be willing to be the agent of punishment? And when I search my soul or my conscience, or whatever you want to call it, the answer is no. I really don't have any interest in punishing anyone, except in really severe cases of extreme harm. In those cases, I might consider inflicting pain, that's punishment, on someone. And also, if I was harmed personally by someone, or if someone I love was harmed, whether it be a human or an animal, I would certainly consider inflicting some serious harm on whoever did that. So I take individual responsibility. I don't put trust in an institution of society to whom or to which I would delegate the power to punish others. I just rule that out. To me, if you're going to think about punishment at all, just think about yourself and what you're willing to do. So what about the perpetrators of the crime against humanity that is currently underway? What about what happens when a moment comes that their crime fails and they are exposed as perpetrators? Have you thought about what is to be done with those perpetrators who are committing crimes against humanity, lying and deceiving, and working for an agenda of horrific destruction. Clearly, the agenda behind the current pandemic is intended to inflict tremendous suffering and destruction of the way of life of many people. Isn't that clear? So when the moment comes that the agents of this horrific act have failed, but they are still there, and their names are known, their names and faces are known, what are you going to do? What would you do if you stood in front of one of them? And if you don't forgive them, well, if you do forgive them, okay, what happens then? It leads to a whole road of behavior, and it leads down a path of behavior, and I advise you to reflect very closely on who benefits from your forgiveness. Now, I don't forgive. Except in very exceptional cases in my personal reality. If something happens, someone makes a mistake, someone does some harm, I will consider forgiveness. But it's very personal. It has to do with me personally. And it's extremely rare. But in the case of these perpetrators of crimes against humanity, for instance, in the talk on Vlad, I gave the example of a media man or media woman who's out there every day spreading lies which are contributing to this horrific crime. So the crime fails, and there I am, faced with one of these people, unless they've entirely gone into hiding, they're still there in the population somewhere. So if I encounter one of these individuals, and it's known and provable how they contributed to the suffering and destruction of life, and I don't forgive them, what do I do? What would you do? All right, so just talking rather loosely today, and I want to come around to the subject of compassion to conclude, but I'm going to loop back just for a moment to clarify something. I said that in certain instances, depending on how it affected me personally, I would be inclined to punish someone. But you have to put that in quotes. It wouldn't be punishment. It would be a deliberate act to inflict suffering. And my attitude in performing that act would not be punitive. I don't have a punitive attitude at all. If you look at what's happening today regarding all the measures that are being imposed to prevent the spread of quantum 19, if you look at the consequences of those policies and measures in the world, I submit to you that what you are witnessing is an immense program of punishment. It's punitive, and it's coming from a mindset. Do you know who that might be? And I'm not a part of that mindset, and I don't have a grain of that mindset in me. So I'll be brutally frank with you on a couple of points which might register vividly in your memory. First of all, I don't consider the life of a human being to be worth more than the life of an animal. And in certain circumstances, if someone harmed or killed an animal that was dear to me, I would certainly consider killing them without blinking an eye. I do not consider that a human life, intrinsically or categorically, is worth more than the life of a cat or dog. No. Now let's take the case to clarify what I said before. I'm in a situation and I decide to act out of my own agency and completely from my own responsibility and punish someone. I won't be punishing them in an attitude of righteousness. For instance, shooting them in the knee. It's not killing them, but certainly they'll suffer, and most likely they'll be crippled for the rest of their life. If I shot someone in the knee, would I be punishing them? No, not at all. What would I be doing? I'd be retaliating out of a visceral need to see someone suffer. In my ethics, in my sense of morality, for what it's worth, it is completely acceptable to want to see other people suffer. Just look at the world today. Don't you think that the technocrats who are behind this want to see the world suffer? Don't you think that they enjoy it? That it's pleasure to them? So for me, I must admit, I could feel a certain satisfaction in harming someone physically and causing them to suffer. If I did that, if I committed such an act, it would not come from a righteous sense that I am an agent of punishment. It would just come from the deeply visceral sense that I really need to see them in pain. I need to see that to satisfy myself. That's what I mean by retaliation. And I hold that behavior completely distinct from punishment. Now, one more observation about this topic goes back to what I said, that in the pagan world, the pre-Christian world, the world outside of Judeo-Christian brainwashing, people dealt with these matters in an entirely different way. And I said that in the pagan world, there is no punishment. And I stand by that statement. There is no punishment in the sense of the Abrahamic code of morals. But there is the equivalent to punishment, you could say, in the code of pagan morals, and that is retaliation. So have you ever heard the Latin expression, lex talionis? That translates as law, lex, of retaliation. And in that word talionis is implied, is contained, the same root of the word talons. So what are talons? Well, look at a predator, bird, such as a hawk or an owl or an eagle. They have these really sharp claws, talons. There's a concept which stands completely distinct from the concept of punishment in the Abrahamic code of ethics, which has largely corrupted and polluted the conscience of the entire world, which is, of course, its intention. With all that said, however well or carefully or skillfully it was said, I'll move on to the subject of compassion. And I want to correct something that I said. I said that I treat compassion as a currency and I expend it carefully. I don't feel compassion for humanity at large. I don't feel compassion for anyone who comes down the road or crosses my path just because they happen to be a member of one of the human races. No, I don't. My compassion goes almost totally and exclusively to those who are warriors. It's a currency among warriors, and it's not to be wasted on people who do not have the courage to fight. Now, I can qualify that statement in this way. I know, and you know as well, that the crime against humanity underway right now, under the program of the Great Reset, is inflicting untold harm and suffering on countless millions of ordinary, decent, working class people. That's the operative term, working class. I have compassion for people in the working class whose lives are being destroyed right now, every moment of every day. I do have compassion for them, and I feel it deeply. However, in any particular situation that I might be in, close up and personal, although I feel compassion for, say, someone who's lost their business or their family business, I will not expend the currency of compassion toward them by an action unless they are willing to stand up and fight for what they have lost and win the battle and win reparation. There are two big R's coming in the beauty to come: retaliation and reparation. So anyone who's willing to stand with me, stand beside me on the line of battle with the intention of achieving those aims, retaliation and full reparation for crimes committed, will have some of my compassion. But otherwise, I can't do anything with my compassion toward anyone who isn't willing to fight for their lives and go to the extent of using lethal force to do so. So to come around finally to the example of the accomplices in this crime, there are the executive directors of the crime, and there is a vast range of accomplices, obviously, right? Well, some of them will be here in the beauty to come. Some of them will still be alive in the society to be constructed on the other side of this event. And what will be their status in that society? As far as I can see, they will face a kind of punishment. They will be outcasts and total pariahs, and no one in their right mind who's contributing to the next world will want to have anything to do with them. And yes, in some cases, it's more than likely that they will be hunted down. And I can't say what the people who hunt them down do with them. But it is inevitable that that rage breaks out. That rage is breaking out now, and it's inevitable that that rage at being duped and violated and betrayed comes to the forefront so that it can be enacted and expressed by certain human animals. If you feel that rage, do you judge it? Do you say, no, I shouldn't feel that way? Do you say to yourself, this is unacceptable because if I act on this rage, then I'll do things which I'm not willing to do. I'm not willing to take responsibility for acting on this rage. Well, if you can't act on your rage, then you don't get any of my compassion, not even half an ounce. Enough said, and I'll be seeing you in the beauty to come.